Let's get started with a quick example of the idea of active drawing. So this is example 1 for week 1, active drawing. We already talked about this idea of active drawing a little bit in the lecture, so watch that if you haven't seen it already. The idea is basically we're not aiming to create a drawing program which is a one-to-one mapping like Microsoft Paint. We're looking for something a little bit more active, maybe something that makes our lines more angular, gives a different sort of quality to them, or maybe something that really gets active and draws flowers and tendrils all over the drawing. So we're thinking about this continuum from creative coding that's more direct one-to-one mapping between the user's action and feedback, and more active ways of thinking about it. So what's that layer of interpretation that we add through our software, through our creative coding sketches, between what a person does with their mouse and what they see on the screen? Let's start by actually just sort of sketching out some quick ideas for what a active coding sketch might look like. So one thing that I thought could be fun, if we start by just drawing a line, we'll start with that direct one-to-one mapping. But what I might do is look at all of the little points that get drawn and think about things we could do at each of those points. Okay, so maybe what we could do is, depending on how far we've gone, we could draw some little spikes off the side. So getting something like a little spiky line, depending on how fast a person draws. That could be a fun one. Another thing we could try is if we keep a record of all of the points that the person draws, we could actually make this an animated line. We could actually have it draw again and again over time. We might try that in the second part if we have time. But we'll start with something simpler, and that will be just actually drawing a continuous line, because that's going to be the basis for what we do here. So we need to each time draw a straight line between where we were last time and where we are now. So we're going to draw this line just through a series of straight line segments. Let's start with that, and then we'll build up. So I'm here in my P5.js editor with the sketch that I started on in the lecture, and what I'm going to do is I'll leave the if mouse is pressed, but I'm going to just change this one to, instead of drawing a circle, I'm going to say I'm going to draw a line. Line, mouse X, mouse Y, P, mouse X, P, mouse Y. Let's see what that does. You can see that's all it takes to draw a continuous line. Let's explain what's happening here. I'm going to get rid of the no cursor because it makes it a bit hard to see where I'm drawing. But each time the mouse moves, this draw function is happening again and again and again. And if the mouse has moved even a little bit between where it is on this frame of the draw function and where it was last time, those numbers that are stored here in P mouse X and mouse Y are going to be different. So mouse X and mouse Y are automatically provided to us. It's a variable that's automatically provided to us by P5.js, and it shows where the mouse is right now. And P mouse X and P mouse Y shows where the mouse was last time we went through the draw function. If we connect up where we were last time with where we are now, and we do that each time, you can see how we get that continuous line. Let's try something else. Let's actually just draw not from mouse X, mouse Y to P mouse P Y, but to 0, 0. Have a think about what we'll get then. If I draw with my mouse, I get this kind of image, which is also quite interesting, I think. And you could play around with where should this be? Should it be 0, 0? Or maybe it should be the center of the screen, 200, 200, center of the canvas. And then I'll get something that's more like a kind of a flower shape. So you can see how even just with small changes, we get quite different visual outputs. maybe this could move over time. That could be something to play with. We're already asking ourselves these what if questions. What if it was the center? What if it was the bottom? What if instead of drawing it exactly to where the mouse was, I swapped them around? So maybe if I drew a second line with mouse Y, mouse X, I'd get something interesting. And I could even change the color on that. I'm taking a long time to choose a color. That will do. And I'll make this first one black. Let's see what that looks like. So I get this thing where the line is kind of going opposite itself in these two different colors. Kind of interesting. You can see how even in these simple examples, there is this active element. The software is doing more than just a one-to-one mapping of what I'm creating. And playing around with these simple variations is how you should approach the active drawing task. Let's go back to what we said we were going to do at the start and actually draw that continuous line. So I'm going to say line from mouse X, and mouse Y, to P mouse X, P mouse Y. And just to make it a bit clear, I'm also going to draw a little circle each time as well. Circle at mouse X, mouse Y. I'm going to make it quite a small one. I'll make it just with a radius even of 2, so it's quite small. Now we should be able to see all those little points that we're joining up. Oops, what happened? I got an error, and the reason is, and this is actually very good, that I got an error in my first example. Reference error, can't find variable surlook. I spelt it wrong. So that's actually really helpful, and it tells me what line it's on line 12. So I can look here, it's number 12 behind my head, 12, and you can see there I've spelt it wrong. And if you look closely, you'll also notice it's not quite the same shade of blue as the other one. So if I type circle, it comes bold. Better? So now you can see those little dots that we're joining up. Let's try and do that thing I said of making some little spikes coming off the dots. So what I'm going to do is each time I draw, I'm also going to draw some random lines coming off those spikes. So let's say, now I'm going to do some things in these examples that you might not have seen in tutorials yet, but you'll probably see next week or the week after. So don't worry about that. Just try and follow along and get the general gist of what's happening. You will learn it in the tutorials as you go through the first part of the semester. But what I'm going to do here is do a loop. So I'm going to draw like 5 random little lines coming off each of those points. I'm going to use something called a for loop. So I'm going to say for let I equals 0, I is less than 5, I plus plus. Now that probably looks like gobbledygook if you haven't done a for loop before, but trust me, it's not that hard to figure out. And by week 3, I think you should have the hang of that. So we're going to say, basically all that's saying is do that 5 times. We're just going to say line, mouse, X, mouse, Y, and then to some random place. So I'm going to say mouse X plus random N, mouse Y plus random N. Now, in case it's not obvious, I'm kind of just making this up as I go along. So there's a fair chance that I'll get stuck and make mistakes. I'm going to leave that in the video so you can see how I solve problems when they come up, because that's actually also a really important part of learning to code. Let's run this. Now when we draw, we get these little spikes. Now do you notice that they're all pointing down, more or less sort of all pointing down, for you it's that way, down to the bottom right corner. That's because we're always adding some number between 0 and 10. And it would probably be better if we said some number between -10 and 10. So let's do that with the random function. Move this onto a second line so it's easier to see. There we go. Now, we've got our spiky line. I said at the start, and I'm not sure if you remember this, but I said I wanted the lines to be spikier the faster I moved. So depending on how fast I moved, I want the spikiness to change. So let's make that happen. So the number we need to change the spikiness is this number in here. Let's make that a variable. And I'm going to call it spikiness. I can call it whatever I like. I could call it flapjacks if I want to. I'm going to say spikiness equals 10. Change that in here. Now, so far I haven't really changed anything. I've just still got 10 for my spikiness. But the advantage of putting it in a variable, it means that I can really easily change it in my code now. So if I wanted to, I could make that 100. And let's run the sketch again. And you'll see now I get really spiky lines. So what I want to happen is that when the user moves faster, they get something that's more spiky. So one way to do that is to look at the distance between each of those points. If I switch back to my sketch, just open it up here. I switch back into here. I'll just zoom in and we can draw it here. Like if you imagine it, when we're actually drawing that line, if I'm drawing slowly, all of those points are pretty close together. But as I draw faster, the points get further apart. And remember what I said before, like this is P mouse X and P mouse Y, and this one here will be mouse X and mouse Y. So the speed that I'm drawing at is actually the distance between P mouse X, P mouse Y, and mouse X, mouse Y. So that distance there from P mouse X, P mouse Y to mouse X, mouse Y is telling me how fast I'm going. So let's use that. There's actually a really easy way to get the distance between 2 points, and that's something called the distance function, dist for distance, and then just the points between. So it's P mouse X, P mouse Y, mouse X, and mouse Y. Just move this over so you can see everything a little bit better. And let's run it. And now if I move slowly, not very spiky, and if I move a bit faster, I get more spikiness. I think that's an example of something that's a little bit active as a drawing. The faster I go, the more spiky it gets. And that spikiness is not really totally controlled by me, but it's partly controlled by me. So there's this interesting mixture between me as the person drawing here and then what the code is doing as well. It's really just to illustrate the idea, and I'm sure that you could do something more interesting for your first assignment. There's really lots that you can explore with this brief, so talk to your tutor if you have any ideas, especially if you have any of those what-if ideas. That's a really great place to start. I'll pause the example here, and then I'll come back in the next part and do that other idea I talked about of having keeping track of the points and having them move over time.